Hello, and welcome to another episode of Healthcare Executive Insights. My name is Mike Sloan. I'm your host from the Macallan Group. Today, we are excited to have with us Ben Lightburn. He is the co-founder, CEO, and director of Filament Health, which is a really exciting company offering a bunch of cool products. So tell us a little bit about what you do, Ben.
Thanks, Mike. Nice to be on the show. Our company, Filament, is focused on exclusively natural psychedelic drug development. So what that means is we develop specific processes and technology to produce pharmaceutical-grade drug candidates from a wide variety of different psychedelic plant and fungal species, such as magic mushrooms. And we secure patent protection on those methods and processes, which yield the various different drug candidates that we have. And then what we do is we license those drug candidates to different drug developers, as well as do our own drug development in certain cases. The other thing that we do is we provide our drug candidates to academic, non-commercial research groups free of charge. And we provide our psilocybin drug candidate through the Health Canada Special Access Program to patients all across Canada who, through their physicians, actually request access to psilocybin. So that's just a little taste of all the things that we get up to.
I was just scratching the surface. So tell me about your background. How did you, come to start this company?
So my background is centered around different startups focused on the commercialization of novel phytochemical extraction technologies. And I got into that basically just by coincidence. I got a summer job when I was in second year of university, working in a facility that was extracting novel cancer APIs from different plant species. And I guess I got hooked. After graduating, I continued working in the field. I eventually got a business degree, thought I would leave the field, came back to a startup company focused on mostly making dietary supplements, but also food ingredients and cosmetic ingredients and natural colors and things like that. That was a startup company also where eventually I became the CEO. We sold that company in 2018 to a large US food ingredients company. After that, the team, didn't end up lasting very long at the acquire. So myself and some former colleagues from the previous company, we got together to start Filament Health because we thought that it would be very important for people to have a choice between natural as well as synthetic psychedelic substances. Up till now, in fact, all research that's been done on psychedelics has been done with synthesized substances. And we set out to change that. Our drug candidates are actually the very first naturally sourced psychedelic drug candidates to get FDA, Health Canada, and various jurisdictions approval to be studied in a clinical trial.
Wow. So in that previous company, were you dealing with psychedelics or were you completely not even?
No, in the previous company, we were focused mostly on dietary supplements, a little bit of food ingredients, cosmetics, a little bit of pharmaceutical ingredients as well. Basically making all different kinds of botanical extracts for all different industries. That's not code word for cannabis either. So we weren't focused on cannabis. We weren't focused on psychedelics, but we were focused on extraction and how to make stable, standardized, commercial grade extracts from, probably 200 different plant species that we have evaluated in our lab. And so that gave us a lot of experience and skills in order to make, the very first commercial grade psychedelic extracts, which, like I said, had never been done before.
Now, your company is focused on the natural extraction, but you mentioned, with a lot of these synthetic ones, are they hybrids? It sounds like there are some aspects of some natural extraction mixed in with complete synthetics. Does that make it a synthetic? Like, where is the line drawn between, does it have to be 100% natural, or what if it contains 5% synthetic? Is it still considered natural? Where's that line drawn?
I don't think you would normally ever blend a natural or a synthetic, because if you can make it 50% natural, then you might as well make it 100% natural. I'm not aware of any products that are blended like that. What makes something natural is that it is extracted from a natural source, and the chemical properties of the extract are not significantly modified from what you find in nature. As soon as you start modifying either the compounds themselves or modifying the ratios of the different compounds that are extracted, you start to lose classification as a natural. You would be considered to be a semi-synthetic. Or there's a further distinction. For instance, FDA has a very well-developed botanical drug guidance. And so a botanical drug is actually a subset of a natural drug. As an example, something can be natural in that it's extracted, purified, and isolated. So it's essentially a pure single compound which is extracted from a natural source. A good example would be paclitaxel or Epidiolex, which is purified CBD. So while those are natural, they're not considered to be botanical. A botanical drug must contain all of the naturally present compounds from the raw material. So like as an example with CBD, you would have to include CBD and THC because both are found in the plant if it's a THC containing species. And that's what we do at Filament. So we make botanical drugs because magic mushrooms have much more than just psilocybin in them, right? They have a dozen or more other secondary compounds, which people do report anecdotally that when you consume different magic mushrooms, they have different effects. And if that's true, it must be because they have different quantities of different substances within them. And so our job at Filament is actually to preserve that naturally occurring entourage, as they call it, of different compounds. So we don't just take the psilocybin out of the mushroom and isolate it. We're very careful to preserve the psilocybin along with all the other compounds that's present in the mushroom in the same ratios and concentrations as if you were to consume the actual raw mushroom itself.
So is psilocybin coming from one particular type of mushroom, or is it found in multiple?
So there's over 100 known species of psilocybin containing mushrooms. And so you can imagine all of these different species have a different set of phytochemicals within them, right? And so each of these is potentially a new drug candidate in its own right? What if this one species or strain has a composition of different phytochemicals that is better for this or better for that? All worth studying, right? And all of that richness and variability is actually lost when all you do is make synthetic psilocybin, because synthetic psilocybin is identical every single time. There's no different variety. There's no different species, right? It's all just one compound, one thing.
But I would assume to a certain extent, as a company like yours, you need to have a certain level of consistency in a product that you're selling, right? So how do you balance that and with the certainly.
So for any drug candidate, consistency, especially for pharmaceutical research, consistency and repeatability and stability are probably the most important things, because if you do a clinical study and the thing that you're studying is variable, then how can you get any insights from the research, right? If you don't know exactly, if all the participants in the study didn't get exactly the same thing, then you can draw no conclusions. And so it is a fair comment to say that synthetically derived substances are more consistent and more stable because they come from a lab, right? You order the raw materials from the Sigma Aldrich catalog rather than from mushrooms that grow in nature, or in our case, they grow in our lab. So how do you bridge that gap between the inherent variability from raw natural species to make it consistent enough for a product to be of a pharmaceutical grade? That is really what our technology is all about. The technology that we've developed to extract the natural psychoactive substances from the raw species, purify them sufficiently so that you can remove enough of the undesirable compounds and yet keep all of the active desirable compounds, and then formulate them and standardize them in such a way that you're giving a highly precise dose, a highly repeatable dose, and one that doesn't degrade over time. Many of these psychedelic compounds are very unstable. And in fact, pharmaceutical research up till now has focused really only on the stable ones. But that doesn't mean that the unstable ones can't yield important pharmaceutical benefits. I should further say that the stable ones have been selected because of their stability in synthetic manufacturing processes, not in natural manufacturing process. So we've actually been able to achieve stability in certain compounds that up till now have not been looked at in clinical research before.
Synthetically, they couldn't do it. Interesting.
Because synthetically, they couldn't do it. Yeah.
Huh. So tell me about, like, you guys are not, how much of your energy is spent on research versus creating new technologies for extraction versus trying to create a product that's more viable, perhaps direct to consumer, or for the pharmaceutical companies presumably you're selling it to? How do you kind of structure that?
Early on, obviously, when we were getting started a few years ago, the focus was mostly on developing the methods and the technologies and filing for IP protection and things like that. Now that the process is pretty much set, the focus is much more on the regulatory development and advancement. So working with different clinical trial sponsors and regulatory agencies all around the world to get our drugs authorized to go into clinical trials. So that's probably the main thing that we work with. So our drug candidates are in, I think, 10 or 15 different clinical trials now all around the world. So they've been reviewed by the FDA, by Health Canada, by Belgium, Denmark, the UK. We're going all over the world with this. So that probably forms the biggest part of our efforts right now. For, like I said, our own clinical trials that we have running, for commercial licensee clinical trials that we have running, as well as academic licensees that we have working with. And then there's this sort of direct to consumer part. It's important to note that psilocybin is still a unapproved experimental therapy, right? It hasn't passed marketing authorization in any country, right? But in Canada, we do have a program called the Special Access Program, which allows for doctors and patients to request access to experimental therapies on an emergency basis if they're suffering from a serious or life-threatening condition. But many of the conditions that psilocybin can potentially address are serious and life-threatening. So Health Canada has actually approved several dozen requests for our psilocybin to be administered to patients with severe treatment-resistant depression, as well as patients suffering from end-of-life depression and anxiety. So we have been able, we're one of the few companies in the world, maybe even the only company in the world that's actively providing pharmaceutical psilocybin to doctors in on an official above board regulated way. And this has been a fascinating experience because we have direct communication to all the different doctors. We hear reports about how the patients are doing, and it's been very, very rewarding for the team. And I think quite unusual in that here we are developing a drug, and yet we're also kind of able to distribute it on a not a wide basis because it is still unapproved, but it's a not insignificant amount that we've been able to give it out.
It's interesting that and now in Colorado and Oregon, right?
Oregon.
They're legalizing it for recreational. Is it fully recreational?
So there's some debate as to whether it can be considered fully recreational. In Oregon, I myself would consider it to be recreational because you can consume psilocybin for any reason whatsoever. The condition is that you have to consume it at a registered service center, is what they call it, and you have to receive it from a trained facilitator, is what they call it. Notice that that's not called it's not a clinic and it's not a therapist. It's a service center, and there is licensure needed. The facility and the facilitator do need to be licensed by the state of Oregon. But like I said, anyone over the age of 21 can show up and say, hey, give me some psilocybin, and by and large, they'll get it. You don't need to have a medical condition. In fact, the facilitators cannot be licensed therapists or doctors or anything like that, or they can be, but they have to make sure to leave that hat at the door. It's really? very because there is no approved medical treatment with psilocybin.
Right.
The Colorado ballot measure, which just passed a couple of weeks ago, it's going to be, I think, a little bit more clinical, but the rules and regs haven't been made yet, just the ballot measure. The Oregon market is actually starting in January. In January, people will be able to apply for licenses.
It's fascinating. Obviously, with how they rolled out marijuana, everything was medicinal initially, and then kind of slowly have been rolling up recreational. So it's interesting that they kind of took that approach. Perhaps it was just because all the red tape to get it, through FDA and all the clinical trials and everything. It's got to be challenging.
That is definitely one of the main arguments made by proponents of state level legalization. They say, hey, these psychedelic substances have been used safely in general by humans for thousands of years. Why should a company need to spend $500 million to $1 billion trying to get this approved as a drug when we already use it every day in the underground market? And I do think that there is some validity to that argument. The flip side is like, the pharmaceutical argument is like, well, hey, we don't know what the actual efficacy is. Like, yeah, it's been used, but being used and proof of efficacy are completely different things, right? If doctors are going to prescribe this to patients and say, hey, like this might help your depression or this might help your PTSD, we better have clinical trials. We also need to know, like, what's the safety profile? Like, what happens if you give this to certain vulnerable populations or to children or whatever, right? Like, we need to know all these things. And the only way to figure it out actually is with clinical trials. And there's just not really any way around that. But what I would say to both of the sides of the argument, to both camps, is there's going to be room for both, right? Yeah. Like, we have approved cannabinoid pharmaceutical products. I don't think there's much competition between those two markets for people, right? Like, for childhood epilepsy, for Epidiolex, or for guy buying pre-roll from the store, there's room for both of those to coexist. So I think we need all of these markets. We need all of the ways, because the problems that we're trying to address with psychedelics are some of the most urgent and pressing crises that facing our society, right? The mental health crisis is very serious and pervasive. The overdose epidemic, all kinds of things, like literally people are dying in the street for lack of better treatment options. So we in my opinion, we need to press go on the state legalization, recreational, whatever you want to call it, as well as the more traditional pharmaceutical development path. As a naturally focused company, we're very comfortable playing in both of those arenas, right? We have very good technology and manufacturing methods, which allow the creation of pharmaceutical products, which form very attractive drug development candidates. But obviously in any, in Oregon State, the market there, it's actually prohibited to market synthetic psychedelics. So only natural psilocybin is permitted, and perfect, right? So what we do is we identify licensees on the ground in Oregon who would like to make our products under license.
Got it. So I was going to ask, like, where are those licensees getting their product?
They would make it themselves.
Oh, interesting. So it was a license to manufacture and distribute. Got it.
Yep.
So what is with your synthesis process of extracting the psilocybin?
It's not synthesis. It's extraction. So it's not synthesis at all. Yeah.
Right. So what does that final product look like? Is it still a mushroom? Is it a powder? Is it a liquid? Like, what does that raw product look like?
It's a capsule. It looks like any other pharmaceutical product that you might consume. It's a highly extracted, purified, standardized capsule. Just looking at it, you wouldn't know that it's any different than anything else. In fact, you would probably be surprised that it would be a natural product.
Gotcha. And what do you foresee as, I know this is all probably very much in its infancy stages as far as costs, how much it costs to get the product out. In order for it to be economically viable on a large scale, there needs to be some kind of economy of scales. Is it comparable on a cost level to the end consumer, to the insurance companies and so on, if it goes that route?
From a manufacturing perspective, or which route are you talking about?
The entire process, right? Either direct to consumer or through pharmaceutical companies, right? Is it a cost-effective alternative to other solutions that are out there? Could it be cost prohibitive? How hard is it to create the product?
According to our modeling, we'll be able to manufacture for a lower cost than with synthetic manufacture. Obviously, we don't know for a fact because none of this has been done on very large scale ever before. Right. But when you're dealing with processes of chemical synthesis, it's actually not necessarily straightforward to scale them up into large scale. You don't necessarily actually get economies of scale. You actually sometimes get poor yields and things like that because of the different size of the reaction vessels and things. Same is not true for natural processes. You very much do get economies of scale. There's no reduction of yield if you have a larger extraction vessel or anything like that. So, the same number of staff can make, 1,000 capsules or 1,000,000 capsules. It doesn't really make much of a difference. But where the costs will definitely vary is in what are the different markets, right? If you're in the Oregon market, which didn't require clinical trials or even like a pharmaceutical grade product, the cost to the consumer is going to be much less because you don't have to recoup the cost of the clinical development. In the pharmaceutical market, the major cost is actually recouping the clinical development costs, right? The manufacturing cost is usually only 1 or 2% of the pharmaceutical product, usually depending on the product. So that's another reason why we're excited about all the different markets, is because they'll all provide different opportunities to price things differently, depending on what was the input development cost to make the product.
Right. So what are some of the biggest kind of short-term and long-term issues or challenges that you guys face?
Well, psilocybin and most of the other psychedelics are scheduled controlled substances in both the United States and Canada. So that does make things relatively difficult, especially for shipping internationally. We have to have all this security stuff. We have to have like safes and rooms and all that kind of thing, which is a little bit annoying because we also have in Vancouver, there's storefronts which are just offering magic mushrooms openly for sale, right? And so Here we are trying to do things by the book and having clinical trials and all that kind of stuff. And because we do that, we have to have all the official paperwork and security and I's dotted and T's crossed and all that kind of thing. So that makes life a little bit challenging.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and I've seen ketamine starting to hit the market in different capacities to treat similar, depression and PTSD type stuff. Now, I was looking at one, I think they said, it's like they're selling like different packages for 5-6 treatments or something like that. Would the psilocybin kind of have a similar model where it's a multiple treatment kind of thing? How is it administered?
So it depends on which kind of ketamine you're talking about. So there's IV, IM, and also intranasal ketamine that you can take. The intranasal ketamine requires like lots of visits, and to a certain degree, the IM or the IV ketamine do as well. Psilocybin is likely the actual like regimen, the dosing regimen hasn't actually been definitively proven or decided, not yet. It will probably be like one treatment, maybe 2 at the beginning, and then 1 every like 3 or 4 months, maybe like
Right.
that. So not like in the case of Spravato, which is intranasal ketamine, it's like every other day or 3 times a week or something like that, where you have to come to a clinic and stay under observation because it is a dissociative as well. The psilocybin is a much more intense experience, especially with a high dose of psilocybin, and you're in the treatment room for like probably 6 to 8 hours. So it's a serious thing. So doing that every other day wouldn't be feasible, and it wouldn't work physiologically as well.
Right. And you were talking about just the financing stuff. When you started this company, did you know immediately you needed to take it public for it to work?
And when we first started it, we didn't know that for a fact. But as we were looking around for different funding sources and fundraising opportunities, at the time there was a very, very strong, I guess you could say, rush in the public markets. And while we were a bit wary of kind of getting involved in all that, as a management team, you want to attract the least dilutive capital that you can. And at that time, that meant going public and raising at a bit of a higher valuation. So yeah, like I said, it wasn't always the intent to go public, but then eventually that's what we decided to do. Unfortunately, the entire time we've been public, the market has been very challenging. So in retrospect, it might not have been the right decision, but obviously hindsight's 2020. It was the right decision at the time, and there's no point trying to second guess anything.
Yep, absolutely. So how do you get the word out there? How do you keep in communication with people who want to learn more about Filament Health? Do you guys have what are your main channels to communicate with people?
So I would definitely say sign up for our mailing list on our website. That's a good way to stay in touch with the company. Sign up for all our social media channels, which are readily available. We have fairly regular investor update shareholder calls. We had one maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. So we try to do those on a fairly regular basis. I also present at a number of different conferences and industry shows and things like that. So if there's ever a psychedelics conference or trade show in your area, go there and maybe I'll be up on stage talking about magic mushrooms. But yeah, sign up for the mailing list is probably the best way to stay abreast of our developments.
And which exchange are you guys traded on?
We're traded on the NEO exchange in Canada, as well as on the OTC markets in the United States.
Excellent. And if anybody is anything else, we'll put links to your website and all that kind of stuff on the podcast here. You guys can check them out below. Any parting words you have for the healthcare community out here?
No, I would say that it's a fascinating time to be developing drugs in any market, but in particular in the psychedelics market. And it's a very interesting kind of experience to be developing a drug based on compounds that humanity has been very familiar with for, like I said, thousands of years. It's a bit of a unique situation. But we strive to live in interesting times, so it's certainly not a complaint.
I agree 100%. I mean, there's so much crap. You mentioned it earlier, just with opioids and depression, and it's a crazy time we live in. The world is so dependent on pills. Everybody wants a pill for everything. So it would be nice to know that, if you do have to take a pill for something, at least it's a natural product.
One of the things that people tell us often is, well, consumers in the pharmaceutical industry, they don't have a preference for natural. They don't choose natural. To which I always reply, when's the last time they were given a choice? Right?
Exactly.
So, like, did your doctor say, if your doctor said, do you want the natural, like, pretend for a second that the natural and the synthetic were identical in their efficacy and their function and all that sort of stuff. Right. We believe we can prove that the natural is more efficacious, but pretend that they're identical. And so your doctor says, I have a synthetic pill and I have a natural pill. They're identical in every way. People are going to take the natural 99% of the time.
Unless it's, 100x the cost. But
unless it's 100x the cost. But if it's the same price, or even if it's only like 10% or 50% more, they'll probably take the natural one. So that's what we always say, right? Like, that people have not actually ever been given the choice.
No, the only choices you have now are the the guys that have the commercials, and you're generic. Exactly. That's it.
Exactly.
So listen, Ben, it was a pleasure speaking with you. It's fascinating stuff. We look forward to hearing more. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a great one. Take care.